Nothing in my life came easy. While my brother coasted through his 20s on our parents' goodwill and a rotating roster of excuses, I was the one working double shifts at the hospital, eating sad desk lunches, and quietly building something for myself, piece by piece, year by year. I'm a registered nurse. I've been one for 7 years. I work at a hospital in Mississauga, Ontario, and I have a second job doing home care visits on weekends when I can manage it. I don't say this to brag. I say it because it's important to understand that every dollar I have, I earned with my own exhausted hands. Nobody handed me anything. Not my parents. Not the universe. Nobody. My brother is 4 years older than me, and I genuinely don't know if he has ever worked a full calendar year in his life. I say that with zero exaggeration. He's had jobs. I'll disposition he quit after 3 months, a landscaping gig that lasted 1 summer, something vague involving consulting that I never fully understood. What he's always had, though, is our parents, specifically, our mother. My mother loves my brother the way some people love a project they know is failing but can't walk away from. She makes excuses for him at family dinners. She forwards him job postings he ignores. She lends him money she calls just to help him get on his feet, a phrase she has been using for the better part of a decade. My father goes along with it because going along with my mother is for him the path of least resistance. He's a quiet man. He picks his battles. He has never once picked a battle involving my brother. I grew up understanding, in that unspoken way children understand things, that I was the one who was supposed to be fine. Not because anyone said it out loud, but because the worry in my mother's voice was always calibrated toward my brother. The phone calls checking in, the surprise visits, the money that quietly moved from their account to his, none of it was ever directed at me. I was the one who was fine, so I made sure to stay fine. By the time I was 31, I had managed to save enough for a down payment on a small condo in Brampton. Nothing flashy, 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a parking spot that cost extra, and was absolutely worth it given the Ontario winters. I put $42,000 down. My mortgage payments were just under $1,800 a month. I had budgeted carefully, sacrificed that-month vacations, said no to things I wanted, said yes to extra shifts I didn't want. That condo was mine. Really mine. The most mine thing I had ever owned. I was proud of it in a way I didn't know how to talk about, without sounding like I was bragging or being ungrateful for other things in my life. I'd stand in the kitchen on early mornings before a shift, holding a coffee, looking out the window at the parking lot below, and feel something close to peace. I had done this. Me. My brother had no permanent address at the time. He'd been renting a room from a friend in Hamilton, and from what I understood, things had gotten tense there too. He was 3 months behind on what he owed the friend, which meant he was also calling my mother more frequently, which meant my mother was also calling me more frequently, asking things like, "Have you talked to your brother lately? And he's going through a hard time. You know how sensitive he gets." I knew. I always knew. What I didn't know was what was already being decided without me. It started in November, on a Sunday. I'd worked a Saturday night shift and had barely slept when my mother called at 9 in the morning. I answered because I always answer. Probably my biggest flaw. She was warm, chatty. She asked about work, about the condo, said she wanted to come see it again soon and maybe bring a plant for the living room. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Then, at the very end, almost like an afterthought, she mentioned that my brother was in a bit of a situation. The situation, as she explained it, was that he owed money. Not to his friend with the room in Hamilton. To someone else. She was vague about who. The amount she mentioned was $11,000. She said it in the same tone she might use to mention the weather, which should have alarmed me more than it did. "We're going to help him," she said. "Your father and I. But we don't quite have that much liquid right now. We have the house, obviously, but pulling from that takes time. We were wondering if you could cover it temporarily and we'd pay you back." I was half asleep. I said I'd think about it. She said thank you, and that she knew I was always so responsible. She said she was proud of me. I should have known, in that moment, that something was already wrong. I did not lend her the money. After I hung up and lay there staring at the ceiling for a while, I decided I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to help my family, but because $11,000 was not a small number for me. It would have wiped out most of my emergency fund. The one a financial advisor at work had told me never to touch. The one that existed so that if something went wrong with the condo, I wasn't completely exposed. I called my mother back that evening and told her I was sorry I couldn't do it right now, and asked if there was another way. She said she understood. She sounded fine. She was not fine. I found out what happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later, When I checked my online banking before a shift and saw that my savings account was short, not slightly short, $4,300 short, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 10 minutes trying to convince myself I was reading it wrong. I refreshed the page. The number didn't change. I went back through the transaction history and found 2 transfers I had not made. One for $2,600 and one for $1,700. Both sent to an account I didn't recognize. Both dated within the past 9 days. My hands were shaking when I called the bank. The customer service rep was polite and apologetic and explained that the transfers had been made using the online banking credentials associated with my account. They were not fraudulent in the system's eyes because the correct username and password had been used. I would need to file a dispute, which could take time. She gave me a reference number and told me not to change my password yet so they could investigate the access pattern. I sat in that parking garage until I was almost late for my shift. I knew, before I had any proof, who had done it. My mother had my online banking login. I had given it to her 2 years earlier, under circumstances I genuinely thought were benign at the time. I'd been in the hospital for a minor procedure, nothing serious, a cyst removal. And I'd asked her to check something in my account while I was in recovery, because I was expecting a deposit from a tenant of mine, a friend subletting the second bedroom. I had typed the login into her phone myself, never changing it afterward because I trusted her completely, and because it never once occurred to me that I should. That was my mistake. I own that. But a mistake in trust is not the same as an invitation. I need to say that clearly. When I called her that evening, she didn't deny it right away. There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to confirm everything. And then she said, I was going to tell you. I was going to pay it back before you even noticed. Before I noticed, I said, it was an emergency, sweetheart. He needed it. It was urgent. I asked her if she understood that what she had done was not a loan, that she had accessed my account without my permission and moved money that was not hers to move. She went quiet for a moment and then said that family doesn't keep score, that I had more than enough, that my brother was in real trouble and she'd had no choice. I asked about the $11,000 she'd mentioned. She said this was part of that. I asked why she hadn't just asked me again directly. She said I'd already said no, so you just did it anyway. I said, I'm your mother, she said, as if that answered everything. It didn't answer anything. My father called me the next day. He was gentler about it, which almost made it worse. He said he understood I was upset, that he wished things had gone differently, that my mother had acted out of panic. He said the intention was always to replace it before I noticed. He said my brother's situation had been dangerous, used that word, dangerous, and that my mother had been scared. I asked him if he had known. There was another one of those pauses. He said he'd found out after the fact. I don't know if I believe that. I still don't know. He asked me not to go to the police. Not as an apology, not as a request with any acknowledgement of what had been done wrong, just as a plea wrapped in the language of family loyalty. We'll figure this out. We just need time. He used the word we like I was still part of whatever we was. I told him I needed to think. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back in my condo, the one I had saved for, the one I was so proud of, and I thought about every version of what happened and what it meant. My mother had my login. She'd used it not once but twice. She had moved $4,300 of my money to help someone who had never once tried to help himself. And when I'd said no directly, she had simply gone around me. The thing that kept snagging in my brain was the word dangerous. What did that mean? Who did my brother owe money to, and why was the amount changing every time it came up? My mother had said $11,000. The transfers were $4,300. None of this added up cleanly, and every time I tried to get a straight answer, I got a deflection wrapped in emotion. Something wasn't right, beyond the obvious thing that wasn't right. I could feel it. I have a colleague at work, Terrence, who I've known for years. He's a paramedic, not a nurse, but we overlap sometimes in the ER, and we've become friends over time in the way you do when you work strange hours together. He has an older cousin who is a paralegal. He offered to have her look at my situation and tell me where I stood legally. I met with her on a Thursday afternoon at a Tim Hortons near the hospital. She was direct, which I appreciated. She told me that what my mother had done could technically be characterized as unauthorized access to financial accounts and misappropriation of funds, regardless of the family relationship. She said family relationships don't create legal permission to move money. She said I had a legitimate dispute with the bank and possibly grounds for civil action against my mother, though criminal charges would be a higher bar to clear and would depend on a number of factors. She also said something that stuck with me. The fact that they asked first, and you said no, And they did it anyway. That matters. It changes the picture. I hadn't thought of it exactly that way before. But she was right. This hadn't been an impulsive act in a moment of crisis. There had been a conversation. There had been a no. The no had been acknowledged and then simply disregarded. She told me to document everything. Write down the dates, the conversations, what was said. Screenshot the transactions. Keep the reference number from the bank. Don't delete any texts. I drove home and did exactly that. My brother called me about a week after I found out. It was the first time he'd called me directly in probably 4 months. He didn't apologize immediately. He started with small talk, and I let him because I wanted to hear what he was going to say. He said he was sorry for putting the family in a difficult position, not sorry for what was done to me, specifically. Sorry for the position. I noticed the phrasing. I asked him who he owed the money to. He was evasive. He said it was a private financial situation. I asked if it involved anything illegal. He hesitated for too long before saying no. I asked if the original amount had been $11,000, why had only $4,300 been moved? He said he'd managed to deal with part of it another way. How? I asked. He said he'd rather not get into it. I sat with that for a minute. Then I asked him, as calmly as I could, why he hadn't gotten a job. Not a rhetorical question, a real one. I told him I wasn't trying to be cruel, I just genuinely wanted to understand what the plan was supposed to be. He said things had been hard. I said I knew things had been hard. I said things had been hard for me too, and I had still managed not to steal from anyone. He went quiet. Then he said that steal was a harsh word. I said I thought it was the accurate word. We didn't speak again for several weeks after that. My mother called twice a day for the first week and a half after I stopped responding to family group chats. She left voicemails that started composed and got gradually more emotional as the days went on. The early ones were explanatory. She laid out her reasoning again, the emergency, the intention to repay, the hope that I would understand. The later ones were tearful. She asked if she had lost me. She said she couldn't sleep. She said she had made a mistake, but she was still my mother, and she loved me and she didn't want things to be this way. I listened to every single one. I didn't delete them. I saved them. I want to be clear. I did not feel nothing. I felt a great deal. I cried in my car in the parking garage more than once during this period, which was apparently becoming my location for private emotional processing. I missed my family the way you miss something you thought was safe, once you realize it wasn't. That's a specific kind of grief, and it's not a small one. But grief doesn't undo what happened. And grief doesn't mean I was wrong about what it meant. The bank dispute took 6 weeks to fully resolve. In the end, they returned the $4,300 to my account and flagged the activity. They walked me through how to reset credentials in a way that would prevent the same access pattern from being used again. The rep I worked with at the branch level was kind and efficient, and I was grateful for her. During those 6 weeks, I also learned a few things I hadn't known before. I found out, through a conversation with an aunt on my father's side, one of those kitchen table conversations at a family event I attended briefly and mostly to gather information, that my brother's private financial situation had not exactly been one situation. It had been several. He had borrowed money from at least 2 family friends over the past year, in smaller amounts, and hadn't paid either back. The $11,000 my mother had initially mentioned to me was apparently the consolidated version of multiple debts, some of which he'd shuffled around. The $4,300 my mother had taken from my account had gone toward one specific person. Not, as I had imagined, someone dangerous in any dramatic sense, but a former roommate who had threatened to take him to small claims court. There was no dangerous situation. There was no urgency that justified what my mother had done. There was just a pattern, a long familiar pattern of my brother making bad choices and my family absorbing the consequences so that he never had to, and the latest consequence had been absorbed by me, without my knowledge, without my consent. After I had explicitly said no, I made a decision in late January. It took me a while to get there, and I want to be honest about the fact that it was not an easy decision, because decisions about family never are, no matter how clear the right thing looks from the outside. I met with my parents in person. I asked them to come to my condo, which felt important to me. I wanted to be on my own ground. My mother brought a tin of cookies, which I thought was both sweet and somehow wildly misreading the situation. My father looked tired. We sat at my kitchen table, and I told them exactly what I wanted to say, which I had written out in a notebook the night before. I told them that I was not going to pursue legal action, and I want to be clear that this was my choice, made freely, not because of pressure from anyone. I made it because I believed the emotional cost of formal proceedings would exceed what I was prepared to carry right now. That calculation might look different in another year. I was keeping that door open. I told them that the money had been returned by the bank, which they knew. I told them that I did not need them to repay me, and that I was not interested in making this a financial negotiation. What I was interested in, I told them, was being honest about what this had changed. I said that I loved them, I meant it. I said that I understood my mother had been scared and had made a terrible decision from a place of panic. I said that I even understood, on some level, the impossible position she feels she's in when it comes to my brother. I didn't say I thought her reasoning was right, but I said I understood it existed. And then I said I can't do this anymore. Not the way it's been. I told them I needed distance. I told them that I would not be attending family events where my brother was present, at least not for a while. I told them I would not be sharing financial information with anyone, would not be accepting help from them in any form, and would not be a resource, direct or indirect, for managing my brother's life. I told them that if they wanted a relationship with me, it would need to be one where I was seen as a separate person with my own boundaries, not a backup plan for the family's financial problems. My mother cried. My father was quiet for a long time. He said he was sorry. The way he said it felt real to me. My mother also said she was sorry, but then she said, I just don't understand how you can punish us for trying to protect your brother. And I realized we were not, at that moment, on the same page and might never be. I didn't argue with her. I didn't have the energy and I didn't think it would help. I asked them to leave. They did. My mother hugged me at the door. I let her. That was 6 months ago now. Things are, complicated is probably the most accurate word. My father and I talk occasionally, carefully neutral territory. He asks about work. I ask about the garden. It feels thin, like something being held together with not quite enough. But it's something. My mother and I have talked twice. The conversations have been careful in the same way. She hasn't brought up my brother. I haven't asked. My brother, I haven't spoken to since the phone call where I used the word steal. I don't know if that's permanent. I'm not committing to permanent. I'm just committed to right now. The friend of his who was threatening small claims court. I found out eventually that he did go ahead with the filing. My brother appeared and they settled. I have no idea who paid what. I don't need to know. What I do know is that my savings account is back where it was. Better actually, because I've kept saving. I'm ahead of where I was supposed to be by this point in my plan. I know that I am not the family's emergency fund. I know that no is a complete sentence even when the person asking is your mother. I know that loving someone does not mean allowing them to take from you without permission, and that being family does not create a right of access to your life, your money, or your choices. I know that forgiving someone and trusting them again are two different things, and that you can do the first without the second, and that is okay. I'm still in Brampton. Still at the hospital, still doing home care visits on weekends when I can manage it. I still stand in my kitchen in the mornings before a shift, holding a coffee, looking at the parking lot below. The feeling is a little different now, quieter, less certain in some ways, more certain in others. But it's still mine, this kitchen, this window this morning. Nobody can move that without my permission, and I won't be giving that password to anyone again.